Alright guys, welcome back to Strong Successful Male. So for today, I'm going to do an update to a pretty popular video I covered about 6 weeks ago, which is titled, Man Uses Cunning and His Famous Lasagna to Expose Cheating Fiancée and Send Her Back to the You-Know-What. And as a recap, because again it's been 6 weeks, that's about the guy who was all set to be married this month, I believe, November 2024, and found out that his fiancée, not only was she cheating, but she was having a full-blown affair with a married guy, I believe. And this guy found this out because the fiancé wasn't too smart covering her tracks, and he used a very clever way to expose her with his lasagna dinner in front of her whole family. And sadly, this guy, he knew her for like 11 years, but clearly didn't really know her. And he obviously was going through a tough time, but he shared the story to help out. And you guys were great, really helping him out in the comment section with words of advice and all that. And this update here, this is a little different than what I normally do. This update actually is not from him. This update is from the father-in-law, the guy who was going to be his father-in-law, about all the things that happened afterwards. Because if you recall in the story, the dude that wrote in, he and the father-in-law had a very close relationship. They were building a deck together, that type of cool thing. And our guy here, who wrote the story initially, he's moving on with his life, because the father-in-law will mention that, but it's been tough. But the father-in-law here shares all the details, what happened afterwards. And let me tell you, I'm sure a lot of you guys had words to say about the father-in-law here in terms of how he raised the daughters and the son and all that, because parents do have an effect on how kids are, how adults behave when they kids to adults. But let me tell you, this guy certainly redeems himself and how he handles the a-hole cheating fiancé, her older sister, the loser's son, the wife, all that, as well as providing updates about this young guy here. Now, by the way, guys, this update here is quite long. Too long for one video, so I'm splitting this up into 2 parts. Part 2 and Part 3. I promise, unless I get struck by lightning or something happens to me, I will publish Part 3 a couple hours after I do this. A lot of y'all that watched me on the Lady What channel yesterday, I did a Part 1 and Part 2, and I didn't do Part 3. I thought y'all were going to kill me. But I assure you both parts will be done tonight. So, get your popcorn. This is going to be a long night for you guys. So it starts off, says here, hello, strong, successful male. I want to send in this update to the story you did about a month ago so I can update you and your community on what happened afterwards and to publicly apologize for my part or my lack of part in what happened. The story I'm talking about is the one where the guy called George found out his fiancée was cheating on him a little more than a month before their planned wedding. The girl in question is my middle child, who he was called Kara, and the story is titled, Man Uses Cunning and His Famous Lasagna to Expose Cheating Fiancé and Send Her Back to the You-Know-What. This is going to be a long, so I apologize for that, but I've taken the last week to get everything in order and write all down. You can call me David, I'm 54, since it's as good as name as any. Okay, pleasure to meet you, David. So it was the end of September when George emailed me a link to the story he sent to your channel, and it was one of the most painful things I've ever had to watch. I knew he was hurt and in a lot of pain, but I didn't know it was as bad as he wrote. There was a lot of fallout from that day. He kicked Kara out, but after watching that video and reading many of the comments, I realized just how devastated he was and that I needed to do what I could to try to balance the scales even a little bit. Well, sir, you certainly do. I've taken a hardline approach to this with my family, and I can tell you that they are not happy. But at this point, I no longer care. You can't care. You have to be tough. And you know what? They deserve it. Every one of them. It's either my way or no way, and if they don't like it, tough. I know it's too late to save George from the pain he's going through, but at the very least, I can help karma along with the consequences and hopefully teach my wife and the kids that there are some things that simply being sorry for isn't enough. Sometimes what's required is a pound of flesh. You're darn right about that. I'm not making excuses, even though it might sound like I am. What I'm doing is explain why I thought and acted the way I did with my own family, which in hindsight fails spectacularly. Don't be me. I grew up in the 70s and 80s in a normal family. We weren't rich, but we weren't poor either. We had a house, and both my parents worked full-time jobs, which left my brother and 2 sisters and I alone a lot of the time. I can remember my thoughts back then resenting it, but thinking about it, it taught us all self-reliance. It was also a time when computers weren't really that popular and the internet wasn't even a thing. If you want to know where all the kids were and your friends, you rode your bike around the neighborhood until you found the house with all the bikes. Yes, I remember that exactly. Oh, the good old days. Yeah, because you try to call your friend, they're not around. Now you text them, and you know they're at Bill's house or something, But the house with all the bikes in the yard, that's where your bros are. Social media was called actually talking to people face to face back then, and being outside was the norm. When I look around today, I never see kids outside playing, and I can't remember the last time I saw a kid ride a bike. Yeah. Now, where I live, which is kind of cool here in Florida, I'm not going to say where, there are always kids out on skateboards and bikes, playing basketball, the playground and everything. So kids are out here, but then again, it's Florida, so you want to be outside, but still. We lived in Pennsylvania, and my dad worked at a steel mill, and my mom worked at a bakery. We never had a lot of excess things, but we always had what we needed. My dad was a hard man. Not mean or abusive, just hard. He works in a steel mill. Come on here. When my father said something, I might as well have been written on stone tablets handed down from God. His word in our home was the law, and if you violated it, at your own risk. I always resented that as a kid, mostly because I didn't understand what he was trying to do. To my younger self, it looked like he didn't care about us, but I've come to realize the truth. He loved us so much that he put boundaries and expectations on his family. Not because he wanted to torment us, but he was preparing us for our lives and the reality that life is hard. Yes, it took me a long time, guys, to really understand that my dad, who was very tough, military dad, born in 1922, the Depression, World War II, Cold War, all that. And yes, guys, I said 1922, he was born. I'm from a second marriage. And so I had, growing up, the equivalent of a grandpa raising me, totally out of touch of what life was like. So I was raised old school, and he was hard, and he was tough, and I didn't like it as a kid, especially a teenager. In fact, there were times as a teenager, I was thinking he was being an a-hole. It took me decades to realize he was doing me a favor, and he loved me. And when I became a man, that was it. He and I were cool. So remember, young guys out there, if your dad's tough on you, understand, unless he really is an abusive dick, he's doing it to help you. Can't stress that enough. Anyway, his dad's word was law. It's a shame it took the destruction of the illusion of the family I thought I had for me to finally understand that I always regret this. Long before this understanding, I swore to myself that I was going to raise my own family better. I was going to give them all the things I never had, and of course, I believed that I was smarter than my dad. Comparing my results and those of my parents, there's no competition. So in other words, you were much softer on your kids and your son. And if I recall from the other story, the son sits around all day and plays video games, living at home at 27. Yeah, he's a fucking loser. And I did say that. And I know you know this. And you had something to do with that. But it's never too late to handle things appropriately. I know you had the best intentions because your dad was too tough. But you now know why he was that way. It helped you become who you are. That's why I think a lot of kids nowadays are the way they are, because their parents were raised by the generation that raised them tough, and then they didn't like this. And I'm going to be my kid's best friend. What happens there? My brother and both my sisters, as well as me, are successful in our own lives, and most of that become attributed to the can-do attitude that we were taught as children. We weren't victims. One of the things my dad always told us that I didn't fully comprehend at the time was that no matter what the day is, it's the best day of your life. Make the most of it, and now I understand. Your old man was right. I can still remember the first time I met George. I knew he and my daughter were in the same grade, but I don't think they were friends or hung out with the same crowd at the time. It was a Saturday morning, one summer, when he knocked on my door. It couldn't have been later than 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning, and there was this scrawly-looking kid wearing a dirty t-shirt and the sleeves cut off and a red bandana wrapped around his forehead. You're probably thinking, oh, hell no, you're not dating my daughter. On the sidewalk behind him was a push lawnmower and a gas can tied to the handle. After opening the door, he smiled, held out his hand to shake mine, and introduced himself before asking if I needed my lawn mowed. My yard was fine, but I was so impressed with him, I said sure. He spent 2 hours mowing grass that didn't need to be mowed and did a great job. He even raked up the grass and set it by the curb. When he finished, he knocked on the door again and told me he was finished. Man, I like George. Good for him. He's going around looking for work. Can you see many kids nowadays doing that? In the summer of '95, my older cousin and I did a lawn mowing business just like that. We must have went to 200 homes in different neighborhoods getting business. And we did. And that's what we did. When I asked him how much I owed him, he told me $5. $5 for 2 hours worth of work plus the cost of gas and all that? I paid him $20. He thanked me and I watched him walk across the street to one of my neighbor's houses and do the same thing. He ended up mowing 5 yards that day, and I spent a lot of time on my porch watching that young man work his ass off with a smile on his face. He was 12 years old. There you go, guys. That's awesome. I would think if I had a son, that'd be my son. Because I do well, but oh no. Son's going to go out there and do work. He's going to learn. After that day, he'd come by every few weeks to mow the grass, and that continued through high school. I've had nothing but respect for that scraggly, hardworking kid that grew into a hard, reliable man over the last 17 years, and I was pleased beyond belief when my daughter brought him over her senior year and said they were dating. Regardless of how things ended with my daughter, I'm going to be there for him however he needs me to be. That's awesome, and it should be that way. Just understand, Dad, it's going to maybe a while that he needs a break from the family, you know? The day that evening fell apart is still hard to grasp. One minute, we were all having a nice dinner, and the next, everything I thought I knew about my family blew up my face. I've known George for a long time, but the man I was looking at that day was someone I did not recognize. I can't remember a time when he didn't have a smile or easy laugh, but when he shouted for Kara to take off the engagement ring, there was no doubt in my mind that there was no coming back from what happened. There is no coming back. He was done with her, and I don't blame him. That was the last time I seen him face to face, at least until 2 days ago. But I'll talk more about that in the end. I want to talk about what happened after he stormed out of the house. Okay, guys, this is where you're going to start getting your money's worth for watching today's show. As soon as the door closed, Kara started freaking out, trying to get out of my arms and go after him. But I shouted at her to shut up and sit down. It was probably the first time in her life that I raised my voice to her, and I saw my wife open her mouth to say something, but I pointed at her and told her not one fucking word. A few times in my life, my dad had to lay down the line like that with my mom when my mom crossed the line. And let me tell you, when he did that, zip, silence. My mom never, ever crossed my dad. She knew. But it took a lot to get to that point. I dragged Kara the few steps to the couch and dropped her on it and laid into all of them about how ashamed I was to be part of my own family and that I couldn't believe all this was going on behind my back. Remember, guys, they all knew fucking Kara was cheating on him. Affair. It looked like my son was about to say something, but I just looked at him and shook my head and he stayed silent. I couldn't believe all this was happening, and it was hard to wrap my mind around how quickly everything turned to shit. Kara was begging her mom and I to help fix it, and that it couldn't end like this. But I snapped at her and told her to shut her damn mouth. I looked at my wife, and for the first time in our relationship, I saw fear. Good. She should fucking fear you. It's an unfortunate reality. Women need to know, I say this more times than like I can say shit in my sleep. They have to know that if they cross you, you'll walk. You're out of there. Not to cross you. And I, of course, don't mean any abusive type of thing. There's a difference here. And until they know they push you too far, there's going to be consequences. They're never going to fully respect you. I don't think your wife probably fully respected you up until this moment. Or your daughters. And certainly your son. I told her, take your cheating daughter and help her pack her shit so we can leave before he gets back. And Kara started wailing again, but I yelled her to shut up and get her stuff unless she wanted George to trash it. Between fits of crying and packing, it took a little longer than an hour, and I had to make 3 trips to the house to drop off stuff and come back for another load before we finished. So I think that they're at his house, because remember he had that big lasagna dinner? And so they're packing up her shit in his place. I left my son at home after the first trip and reminded him he better start looking for work and a place to live. Yeah, it's about fucking time. I know you know this, but you are responsible that your son's 27 at home, no job, playing fucking video games all day. And this is where, if you were a tough dad like your dad was to you, this probably wouldn't happen. But what's done is done, and I know you're going to acknowledge that. But doesn't mean there isn't a time for him to change. But it requires you laying down the law. So good, yeah. Pack your shit, kid. Get the fuck out. Find a job. Otherwise, you're going to be panhandling over by Walmart. My son tried to argue that it wasn't fair. And I told him that life isn't fair, and it's time for him to grow the hell up and take responsibility for his own life. Hell yeah. My dad told me life wasn't fair when I did that stupid shit. That's not fair, Dad. I did that one time in my life to my dad. You know how old I was, guys? 6, maybe 7 years old. And my dad looked me straight in the eye and said, life isn't fair. And he was right. And given the time period he was born and what he went through and everything, yeah, little fucking me whining about some bullshit. That's one of the best lessons a parent can teach a kid early on. Life isn't fair. Before we made it home, I called my oldest daughter, and when she answered, it was pretty clear she hadn't heard anything yet. I told her to be at the house in 30 minutes, and when she started to protest, I told her to have her ass at the house or never come over again, and I hung up on her. Whoa, dude, you were on a roll today. I bet her ass was like on fire to get to your house. I can't think of a time in my life I've been so livid. When we all got home, I told Kara and my wife to get everything out of the cars, and we will be going to have a family meeting, and went inside. I could have helped them unload the cars, but they were the ones who created the mess, and a little work never hurt anyone. I just needed some quiet time for a few minutes and clear my head. So I went to the bathroom to splash water in my face, and on my way there, I passed my son's room, and when I looked in, I was stunned. Okay, guys, what do you think his son is doing? Do you think his son is packing to go get out of there? Do you think his son was looking up for job listings or something? Place your bets. There that kid was, sitting on his computer, playing a game. Yeah, his ass is grass. If I had a weapon, I would have done something to him. Instead, I stormed in and threw the computer on the floor. It's okay. I'm the one that paid for it. It's only breaking my own property. Oh my God. He's about to have a 27-year-old temper tantrum. He started bitching and bowed up on me for a second until I slapped the shit out of him and told him to go sit on his ass in the living room. Good job, man. Smacked the stupid right out of him. Don't worry, it wasn't abuse. It was corrective action. I don't think it's abuse. I don't think anybody else watching this thinks it's abuse. I bet you there's probably 1,000 guys watching this right now that would like to stand in line and get their chance to bitch slap that kid. Because I don't think there's anybody here nowadays that don't know a spoiled, entitled fuckhead like that you want to smack. I'd love to. Tell me where you live. I'll come visit you in Pennsylvania. My family's there anyway. And I'll smack him. He looked stunned for a second and then headed for the living room and went to splash some water on my face. I went to splash water on my face. How the hell did things turn out like this? And it was that thought that made me think of my dad and all the lessons he tried to teach me. It all made sense, and I felt like a complete fool. I guess the old man knew what he was doing. Your dad knew what he was doing, all right. This is your steel mill dad. You want to talk about a tough bastard. He probably spent his whole life working in the mills, hot as hell, doing what he had to do, working overtime in the fucking hot mill to help take care of you guys. But sir, what is done is done. You can't change the past, but you can change how things are going forward. And I think after this, all your kids and wife aren't going to fuck with you anymore, as long as you keep this up. It took me about 20 minutes to get my heart rate down and calm down. And when I returned to the living room, Kara and her sister were sitting together, and my son was sitting with my wife. They all been talking quietly to each other until I walked in. As soon as she saw me, my wife said, I needed to calm down. Notice the kids are got quiet when he walked in, but the wife's now trying to pull some bullshit. Because the wife, probably up until this point, probably could pull bullshit. I told her, I'll get to you in a minute, and then looked at my oldest daughter and asked her why she lied to me about why she got divorced. Remember, the older sister here is a divorced single MOM. At first, she looked at her mom until I yelled at her to answer the damn question. I was told they divorced because they weren't getting along and that her ex-husband was treating her bad. I lost a lot of respect for him and have been cold to him ever since. Not one time did he mention why they really split, and sometime very soon I'm going to apologize to him and ask him why. My daughter said that she fell out of love with him and thought they weren't going to last much longer. I yelled at her, then why didn't you just file for divorce and leave the man with some dignity? I said he was good enough to have a child with, but not good enough to show some basic respect. She tried to argue, but I held up my hand to silence her, and I felt old. Really old. I told her that I was disgusted that she even had my blood in her veins. If she was even my daughter, looking directly into my wife's eyes. Whoa! Whoa! Well, given your wife's behavior, we're all thinking it. My wife gasped, and the room went dead silent for a few seconds before my wife burst into tears. Say it, guys. Say it, say it, say it. Bag Handbook, Chapter 2. All else fails, bring on the waterworks. That has been the downfall of men. Pussy and tears is the downfall of men every fucking time. I told her to stop, and I was going to find out one way or another. It didn't take my oldest long to start yelling at me and asking me how I could say such a thing, and I bellowed at all of them to shut the hell up. See, they still think you're still the same nice guy dad. You're shaking them a bit, but they're still pulling bullshit. They're learning real quick. I told them they've all been keeping secrets from me and lying to me, and the only thing you can trust is a liar to do. The only thing you can trust a liar to do is lie. It felt like my entire world was upside down. It took a minute to calm down again and told all of them that they were going to talk. We were going to talk again the following day. I was going to ask questions, and they were going to give me answers. And if I caught any of them in a lie or admitting anything, I was going to burn down their world. And I stormed out of the room and went to my office. Good for you, Dad. If your dad is still alive and knows what's going on, he'd be proud of you for doing this. If your dad is no longer around, he's smiling down from heaven saying, good job, son. I never understood why people get so angry when that they punch walls. But it was making a lot of sense now. I didn't, mind you, but I understood. It took me a while to calm down, and when I did, I logged into my bank account and made sure to lock down all the accounts with new passwords before I grabbed my keys and left. They were all still sitting in the living room when I walked past, but at least they were smart enough to leave me alone. I just needed to take a drive and figure out what to do with this mess. Man, you are handling things quite well. And guys, that is the end of part 2. Stop screaming at me, I know it's coming. But I will have part 3, wrapping this up, how this guy handles things, and more details about his wife and daughter and a-hole son, but also, importantly, the guy in the story who was hurt by the daughter. So it's going to be a very good one to end this whole story. So I will see you back in a couple hours. Set your timer. I'll keep my word, and you'll see how this thing wraps up. I'll see you then.